Hi everyone, my name is Rick Veach and I'd like to welcome you to today's very special webinar. Dr. Rob, Neal and Layne Savoie are the founders of WedgeCraft, and they've been a big part of our efforts to provide high-level instructional content for Team Titleist. And of course, that's all geared towards trying to help you play better, me play better, everyone in Team Titleist play better. Today, Layne and Doc will be sharing the science behind wedge play. And they'll be looking at the fundamentals used by some of the world's best wedge players and showing how we can apply the same principles to improve our own short games. Before we get started, though, I just want to introduce Alan Blocker, our Team Titleist manager, who's going to walk us through some of the Q&A process that we'll be dealing with today in the webinar. Alan, let me push him on.
Hey everybody, welcome to our new platform of Teams. If you've joined us on some Zoom panels in the past, a little bit different functionality here, but pretty similar. There should be a Q&A icon on your screen. It's kind of two chat bubbles with a question mark. So if you have any questions, pose them there. They will be moderated, but full trust with Team Titleist, they'll be totally appropriate and applicable to the discussion. Keeping in mind with the discussion, it's a presentation, so we're going to take breaks to address the questions. So just keep that in mind as the presentation's going and you're asking those questions. We'll take a stop to address them at that point, so we don't kind of disrupt the flow. So your questions are invited. We love the interactive aspect of these, so please do populate those. And yeah, let's kick it over to Rob and get into it.
So I just wanted to check, first of all, everyone is seeing the presentation screen, and if I get a thumbs up, then we should be good to go. So firstly, it's important when you do a presentation to thank those people who have helped you put it together. And firstly, to Rick Veach, who's actually been the driver of this whole thing, and we're really happy that he's been on board and helped us with the logistics and getting this thing underway. Secondly, the West Coast team, including Jeremy Stern, Bob Vokey, for providing us with the best wedges in the world. So these are the SM8s that we just recently received. And of course, the staff at Cushion headquarters on the East Coast for providing the best golf balls in the world. And those are the Pro V, 1 and X, as well as the new AVX. Lastly, just if you're ever wanting to contact Layne, he works out of Mark Blackburn's Golf Academy in Greystone, that's in Birmingham, Alabama, and I work out of the International Junior Golf Academy at Bishopsgate, which is near Orlando. And before the nuts and bolts of the seminar, just to give you a brief overview of what is in store for you today. So firstly, there's going to be about a half an hour of introduction covering some of the material necessary for you to understand wedge play, just at a level that's appropriate for you, and then some tremendous examples from the Titleist staff players hitting a variety of wedge shots. The second half of the workshop or seminar, we're going to take a deeper dive into 3 particular shots: a distance wedge, a finesse wedge, and a flop shot, because we feel like the skills you need to develop for each of those shots is really going to help you with your game. And so that's why we're going to spend the majority of time in that area. And so I'm going to head over to Layne now and make sure that you guys know a little bit about the background, and then we're going to give you the background story.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. And again, thank you, Team Titleist, for joining us today. I wanted to get started on the essence of wedge play. And the thing about a wedge is Doc and I strongly feel like that the performance of a wedge is largely dictated by how much spin you can create on the golf ball, and that's certainly the case at shorter distances, and that's where the best wedge players tend to pull away from the crowd. So let's talk about that performance and what it means to spin the ball and how do we do that. And so from a teaching and coaching standpoint, I've got an equation there. You can see equipment plus technique equals spin. So let's go over the different components of that. The equipment can be viewed as the ball and the club combination. Both of them are crucial. So let's talk about the ball first. Golfers who seek spin performance around the green, like you see on tour, on television, we need to understand something, that when you buy a ball like a Pro V1 or the AVX family, that classic golf ball, you're buying spin and not distance. That urethane cover and the technology in it is crucial for that aspect of the golf ball. There's a lot of golf balls that go far, but only a few spin in that class. And that is essentially how they're priced in the marketplace. So secondly, the wedges, we just suggest using fresh wedges. That means that, to give you an example, the average consumer weekend golfer, the studies show, the surveys show that they keep a wedge in their bag for 4 years. Yet what we determine as spin is what we're subjected to on television. Those guys, the top players on tour, they're changing their wedges every 3 weeks or so. To give you an idea how often they turn that over, the Titleist studies have shown that almost a 25% spin decay with less than 1,000 strikes on the club face. So this is really a sensitive area. And Doc and I have said for years now that wedges, if you really want to spin the ball and you're a tournament player and you play those racy conditions, that wedges need to kind of be viewed like golf balls or gloves in that they have a very short shelf life. They're not like a putter or a driver in that sense. So tour pros are changing them out monthly on a regular basis. The good news about this is you could buy half of the spin equation. You just need to work hard on some of these tips we're going to go over from the technique aspect.
We thought we should give you a little background to WedgeCraft and the two protagonists, Layne Savoie on the left and me on the right. About 7 years ago, we began an elaborate research investigation on wedge play, including bunker shots, shots from the rough and from the fairway, and distances ranging from 10 yards through to 100 yards. You can see a video here of Luke Donald hitting a bunker shot about 30 yards. We had 3D motion capture available, and here is that same swing as captured on the 3D. And you can see the avatar moving here, just as Luke did on the previous slide. What we also have available with the 3D avatar is measurements, quantitative details on rotations and speeds of movement, sequencing, the whole 9 yards. So we use that to understand the movement of the body. But we needed to understand the club dynamics and the ball-club interaction even better. So we went to the Royal and Ancient Research and Test Centre in St Andrews and collected data on impact across the face with different distance wedge shots. We also collected data on the golf ball, so how it spun, its trajectory, and we used TrackMan or sometimes the GC Quad to measure the ball and club movement down at impact. So this gave us a very comprehensive set of data on the best players in the world, and here are examples of some of the major champions and Ryder Cup players. The years of research led us to come up with 7 principles known as the control variables, which govern and guide you in playing wedge shots correctly. It doesn't matter what skill level or the type of shots, these are all important. And we call them the control variables because you as the golfer need to be able to control each one of those when you hit a shot. Attack angle is about how quickly the club is moving down at impact. The speed, obviously, is how fast the club head is moving when it strikes the ball. Forward shaft lean or shaft lean is common in all wedge shots. Your ability to assess the lie and choose an appropriate shot is what we call intellect, whereas the club path is the direction in a horizontal plane that the club is moving. Face angle is really a complex concept with wedge play, and it's where the face is actually pointing. Contact point where you strike the ball on the club face. So what follows is a little bit more of a picture description of all of those variables. So here we see attack angle, and the downward movement of the red arrows indicates the attack angle or how much the club is descending when it hits the ball. The next example is the club speed, so how fast the club is moving at impact. And so typically it's the velocity of the point of contact on the club face that's critical here. Shaft lean, we learned, is really crucial in all forms of wedge play, but in particular in distance wedges, because the amount of shaft lean dictates how much loft you deliver to the shot, and that is highly correlated to how far the ball will go. As I said earlier, being able to choose the right shot in the appropriate situation will really help you to become a better wedge player and save shots during your round. Club path is the direction the club's moving when it strikes the ball. So if we have a look at this little video here, the white line indicates the target line, and the red arc is an indication of the club path. So it's where on that arc you strike the ball. Face angle, as I said before, is quite complicated because often in wedge play you'll open up the leading edge and that'll change the direction the club face is pointing. But the bottom line is that if you want to hit shots towards your target or on your target line, you need to get that orange stick pointing towards the target. And lastly, contact point. There's a lot of discussion about contact point and how important it is in wedge play. If you watch this little video as the club descends and hits the ball here, we're very interested to know where on the face the ball is struck, because that will allow us to predict how far the ball will go and how it will spin. We have collated a whole array of shots taken from various sources of the Titleist staff players hitting wedge shots, mostly in PGA Tour events, but here's a British Open example. What we would like you to do is just observe these and take in particular note some of the things that we might see as features of the shots: ball behavior, body movement, how the club moves. So have a look at these shots, and we're going to go back in detail and look at each one of them and just give you some insights as to what we see. But enjoy some of these shots from these great Titleist players.
So moving along, we're going to take a real good look at this, and I think this is going to be played on a loop. And I want you to notice some of the stuff that Doc and I see when we're watching this. We've got Adam Scott on 10 at Riviera with a great layup position, probably around 100 yards, which is crucial because that will dictate a lot of the ball action and the land angle. And so on a guarded pin, he's obviously using some of the slope. He's being assisted by the slope there. But in the motion, as we watch again on this last illustration, watch how shallow that attack angle is, how slight the divot is, and the body control and rotation. Beautiful posture for a distance wedge. Next, we have Justin Thomas.
And we should make note here that Justin and his dad, Mike, who is his coach, really helped us out with providing us with some footage that you'll see later on in the presentation. So that was awesome for both Justin and Mike to allow us. Completely different ball action here. So this is at the US Open, a much shorter shot. You can see the ball checks, but it doesn't back up the way Adams did. And so this is a function of the green type, the slope of the green, and the fact that this is a much shorter shot, and so you can't get the same land angles and spin that you can on the longer shots. And if we head over to the next shot where Layne's going to talk you through a 75-yard shot that Justin's hitting.
Yeah, and the first thing that really jumps out to Doc and I is the ball action and the motion match. It's clearly a very obvious cut-like motion with his alignment, and he's controlling his club path going left. This is a really advanced motion for such a long distance. We more commonly see this 20, 30, and 40 yards when they're trying to generate a little more spin on the ball. But this is spectacular stuff. Moving along, we're going to have a look at Ian Poulter coming up.
So this is a standard pitch shot by Ian, and you can see the ball action there. This is probably around 50 yards. Great technique here. The things that you'll notice is one of the things I really like is the very early rotation with his head. And that helps him to clear his body. So it's one thing that amateurs often do incorrectly is that they keep their head stuck down too long and their body not rotated sufficiently, and that doesn't allow them to move their arms and body very well. And if we head along now to the next example is Jordan Spieth. There's a magnificent distance wedge shot here that Jordan's hitting. And again, we'd like to thank Cameron McCormick for being so helpful and positive in allowing us to use Justin as an example, and also giving us some insights when Layne saw him at the Muirfield Village just recently. So the thing that I note particularly on this one is that there's a lot of shaft lean at impact. So Jordan really has his hands forward a long way. And this is a steeper attack angle than you saw with Adam hitting a similar length shot. So what we're saying is that different players will use slight modifications of technique and change the control variables in order to produce the desired effects.
And now we have pretty much the opposite side of the spectrum here out of Jordan. Very different technique opposed to what that fairway wedge presented. This is a beautiful illustration of a really open face bunker shot. The aspect of the open face is a huge difference. We think from the typical weekend golfer's sand technique, we do not find that the vast majority of people get the club face open enough and they're never really exposing the bounce to the sand, and they're not really using the tool properly. So if there's one thing to gather from this illustration is just watching that club face and notice the kind of matching hand path going left because the face is so open. But that's it's a rare angle to see a tour player pitch the ball from, but I think there's a lot of input we can gather.
And now we're going to see Adam Scott hitting about maybe it's a 30 yard, might be a little bit longer, that flop shot. This is a very, very difficult shot coming out of the rough. And one of the things that we would like you to note here is that if you have a look at him at address, his body is kind of closed off and the hands are low, but he's got the leading edge of the face rotated open. So this is one way of adding loft, but still getting the club to point in the direction that you want the ball to go. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go into the flop shot later on, but beautiful example from Adam there. And then over to Jordan again. Layne.
Yes, Jordan's pitching the ball 10 feet in the air. He's obviously very comfortable with a lot of shaft lean, playing a little steeper style attack angle. We see him do this quite often. But this is a pretty standard technique. He's just a little bit strong in some of these angles because he's comfortable doing it. It's somewhat of a preference for him. But notice the ball location at the start. It's assisting with the shaft lean for both setup and impact. And this lower trajectory, people just need to be aware there's got to be enough green space available to pitch the ball in this manner. But the ball behavior is kind of a check, check, give, and that's a typical, you want to see a couple check, checks before the ball relaxes and releases a little bit there, but that's a perfect illustration from Jordan. And moving along, we have Duffner now hitting it about the same distance, but vastly different trajectory, a different style of shot. This is out of the rough, and what we're picking up here is that it is very similar to that technique we saw Jordan using out of the bunker when he was hitting towards the camera. And what you're seeing is very obvious weight left at address, really open club face, body line shut, similar to what we saw from Adam Scott. But because the ball's sitting down, he's having to employ a steeper attack angle so that lead edge can fit under the ball when the face is open like that. And because he wants the ball to go high, one of the significant control variables here that he's got to master to match the trajectory is he's got to have minimal shaft lean, and he's just got to watch that nice underhanded release, watch that club face stay really open in these frames.
And then somewhat similar, here's Jordan hitting a shot we think in Texas. Obviously it found its way to the hole, so you can't question the result here. I think the standout feature here is how much Jordan, through impact and into follow through, extends and rotates the body. And this will give him a shallow attack angle. So the rough isn't as deep as the stuff that Duffner was hitting out. So he can afford to be shallow here. And that body extension and rotation allows him to get the handle to move up, which keeps his attack angle shallow. And we're now going to have a look at, this is a super, super special shot here hit by Justin Thomas. This is a little 30-yard nipper and comes over the bunker, checks hard, and then just relaxes out to the hole. The advanced characteristics here, the hand and the club path are left here. He's probably hitting this one off the toe of the club face. He's still got shaft lean. In fact, we'll see that on the next slide. He's got shaft lean on this shot here, but because of the way he's using the tool, he can still get plenty of grab, and the ball launches somewhat low, not really low, but enough so that he can get over the bunker and have enough spin on it that it can stop. And then if we have a look at Mr. Poulter here.
So we're going to do a little bit of a video exercise here. We're going to watch Ian hit this shot a few times. We want you to pay attention to the ball behavior. Keep in mind that this is obviously a lovely little pitch from Poulter at Hilton Head, and we're going to do a quick review on some of these fundamentals. Remember here that this is the same distance shot that we just saw at Justin Thomas, where the ball was really spinning, and so we've got vastly different ball behavior on the same distance shot. A lot of that is driven because of the face angle being used is square. It's not open, where Justin's was open, and his path is very neutral, and so we're going to get very standard kind of action on the ball. Again, mentioning that check, check, give. You see the ball hop in the air twice, then relax up to the hole. And he's likely using the center of the club face, which is contrasting to what we saw out of Justin. It's a different technique, but it's a standard technique. We got to remember JT's kind of cut swings there are pretty specialized from those distances. A lot of this is just simply driven by the amount of green and the angles that the players are having to work with. But watch his body movements closely, and we're going to slow this down and put it into a few frames for you in the next image. So these were really speaking pretty strong to me at how textbook a lot of these fundamentals are. So we'll start on the frame all the way to the left. The things that my eyes go to are we're at the top of his swing, and I want you to notice how much torso turn there is. There's a significant amount of body turn, especially in his upper chest, his shirt, that we see as a trend, the massive turn on short shots from the best wedge players. Secondly, look at the forward bend. He's really in his posture. And so those are two areas that we see the weekend golfer pivot from. They're not turning enough, and they generally speaking don't have enough forward bend in their posture, or they lose their forward bend at one point. So moving along to frame 2, and I want your eyes to kind of bounce back and forth between that logo on his cap, and you clearly notice different amount of sunlight on his face now. It's really evident that his head is starting to rotate really early. And that is a really nice feature. We commonly see this on some of the best ball strikers. Ian is not known for his ball striking, but he certainly has a beautiful fundamental wedge technique here that we would advocate. The early rotation of the head is just allowing him to turn more aggressively through impact. It frees his body up. And as we look to frame 3 to the far right, we see a lot of changes here. Notice how the body posture is much different. He is rotating and he's extending everywhere. There's a ton of logos on the shirt now that you can see. And secondly, the lower body is vastly different. Look at the pelvis. The lead leg is much taller. The chest is really rotated. They're all kind of catching up with where the head is leading the motion. And so this is a big key for people. If they feel restricted at impact, just let the chin rotate early, and a lot of times it could prompt rotation for you. Lastly, let's not forget the wrist angles and what he's doing down at the bottom. Very disciplined out of the hands. The handle is close to his body. It's indicating a lot of connection in the lead arm. We're going to talk about that in the future on some distance wedges. And the club head is down. This is the same, what we call a 730 position that a lot of the other players are demonstrating throughout this presentation. He is clearly maintaining a flat lead wrist, which preserves the shaft lean. Ultimately, he knows what loft he's delivering for this shot. This is very similar to what we're going to see as Steve Stricker comes up. The wrist angles match from the same distance.
So here's Steve hitting a 75-yard shot. Again, very, very similar things to Ian. Big shoulder turn, good maintenance of spine angle. One of the big differences is that Steve does not hinge the wrists as much as Poulter, and really you can see that he makes a little move in transition here, which tends to get the club moving on an in to out path. Now this could be something that would be really valuable for many amateur players whose predominant pattern is to come over the top and be too far left with their swing plane and their club path. So again, notice that the extension post impact, so it maintaining good posture all the way through impact, and then up and out of the shot, letting his body face the target as the ball flies there. And next is a close-up high speed of Steve Stricker.
Yeah, and so this is approximately the same distance, about 30 yards, that we watched Poulter pitch the ball from and take those looks at. And so it's a nice close-up, very passive wrist action. You can see he's incorporating massive amount of body turn because he does not have a lot of wrist angles, as Doc mentioned, and you can clearly see the extension after impact. Sometimes even before impact. It's critical that people realize it's okay to have their body at their head, their waist bend. You can lose those angles a little bit to shallow that impact position and help you maintain that shaft lean without sticking it in the ground. But there's huge advantages there. This is just a great angle. Notice the release of the body and the hands in the club. It matches so many of the other players we're going to see. Again, notice that 730 position is textbook.
And then we really put this video in here for you of Jason Duffner hitting a 20-yard, we'll say square face standard little finesse wedge shot. We think that amateur golfers could learn a lot from copying this technique here. And as I said earlier, we're going to dive deeply into finesse wedges, but this is just beautiful technique, great body rotations, not a lot of hinge, great rotation through impact, and then the turn and extension of the body just prior to impact helps to shallow the whole thing out. You can hardly see a mark on the ground from where the club and the turf interact. So
yeah,
Layne, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're near the halfway point, and we would like to ask if there are any questions on some of the stuff we've just covered. Please feel free to start submitting those. But we're going to take a close look at the shots that you now see on the screen. We're going to look at a distance wedge, finesse wedge, and a flop shot as some core primary skills that are necessary for you to help improve your scoring with your SMA wedges. We refer to the language that Doc Neal and I talk about. We like to stay focused on the control variables. This is the foundation of wedge play in our eyes. You have to be able to have the ability to manipulate these qualities of your technique. And so we're going to, again, look at these three shots. They're all going to be somewhat different from each other, where different skills are needed. And we're going to allow you to kind of access some drills here. We're going to demonstrate some stuff, take a closer look at what you could do to prepare you to hit these shots. And hopefully it'll improve your learning as you take some of these keys to the practice tee and the golf course.
And the way each one of these little sections is organized is that we'll go through the control variables. Layne or I will give you some good examples of some of the Titleist tour players. And then Layne has put together a series of drills that will really help you to learn the skills that we've just talked about. So the first are distance wedges, and just for absolute clarity, distance wedges are typically in the range of, a little bit longer than 40 yards. This is carry distance out to about 125 yards, and that's solely dependent on your club head speed. So the tour players can hit a pitching wedge probably 140 or maybe even 150 yards. But for the typical amateur golfer, their pitching wedge is maybe closer to 100 yards. And so their distance wedge range maybe from 40 to 100 yards. It doesn't matter, but these are the longer distances that you would hit a wedge. And then if we move on to the next slide, the key variables that you must control if you're going to become a good distance wedge player are shaft lean, that's really shaft lean at impact, and then where on the club face you hit the ball. So just for clarification, shaft lean is how much, in this case, forward lean, how much the hands are ahead of the club head at impact. And so with distance wedges, we want something of the order of 10 to 15 degrees of shaft lean. So if you're hitting a 60-degree wedge, then you're de-lofting it by 10 or 15 degrees. So you're delivering loft of about 45 to 50 degrees. Then contact point. So here's an image here on the right of a whole bunch of different shots hit with the one club. We want to get our distance wedges being struck from exactly the same place on the club and as close to the sweet spot as we can, because that will give us consistency in the amount of energy that's transferred to the ball at impact. If we're hitting it all over the face, we'll never be good at controlling our distance.
So now we're going to take a look at Jordan Spieth in this particular space. This is on the long side of things. This is a 118-yard shot. These are beautiful images. This is about 2,000 frames per second in 4K provided by the Titleist group. Awesome stuff, great detail. And the thing that kind of jumps out to Doc and I is that, first off, he's using the same technique primarily from 70 to 125. You're not going to see a huge change in technique unless there's a specialty situation. Okay, so they're trying to master this one particular movement. And the best plan for mastering your distance control and getting very consistent in this space and learning your yardages is ultimately you need to learn how far your clubs go by having proper loft gaps in your SM8s, and getting a fitting would help you understand if that's the case and how that blends into your primary set. But then beyond that, you're going to have to learn how to get into the proper impact position first. And so from a learning perspective, it's critical to understand the dynamic loft of impact, and you have to learn that first. Get into that proper shaft lean position, as Doc mentioned, between 10 and 15 degrees. Then you can start to focus as a second layer on changing your club speed. Okay, but the consistency is going to be found through finding the proper shaft lean at impact, changing your speed, and then lastly, having real precise movement patterns from your body, because your rotational aspects of the shot are going to be able to control your consistent contact point. And so some of the technique details you see here from Jordan, the arms and hands are trying to take loft off of the club. You see a stronger club face angle than in some of the other images. You could see it right here on the takeaway. The face is looking at the ball, and you see the way it tips over coming into impact. He's really trying to get the club face stronger, and we know from the other images we've seen out of Jordan on the fairway wedges, he's really trying to lean that shaft forward as well, take loft off the club from that aspect. So he has shaft lean and lead edge concepts employed here. And then you know that the body is supplying most of the energy. He's got a massive amount of rotation, and he's controlling the speed by which he turns. And he has to do this in his posture. That's probably one of the main differences Doc and I see. Most weekend golfers are using the opposite formula. The club face is not strong enough. There's not enough shaft lean leaning forward. And then in terms of the body, there's a lot of early extension and no rotation occurring at impact, and that's why the ball kind of pops up in the air, slides off the face, and it really doesn't have any spin action that you're about to see, and we'll discuss in more detail. Golfers have to really get the club in a better position at the bottom if you want to learn how to spin the ball like you're going to see here.
And this is the same shot, by the way. So this is the ball green interaction. And I'm just going to go back to the beginning here so you can have a look more closely at the angle that the ball is landing at. So maybe it's around 40 to 45 degrees. And then it's got so much spin on it that the next launch is much, much higher. And then when it lands on the second hop, it's going to land at quite a steep landing angle. And so the combination of spin and land angle is what brings the ball to rest. So the quality of your golf ball and club and your technique allows you to generate spin. If you get enough spin on the ball, then on each successive bounce, it'll still have backspin. And so that will stop the ball quickly. If you use a Surlyn covered ball with bad wedges, not those beautiful new SM8s, then you just cannot get that same ball performance that Jordan did. Now, the harder the greens are that you play, that's the firmness, the more you have to rely on spin generation to be able to stop the golf ball. So remember that. Good equipment will allow you the window to create the spin that you need to stop the golf ball.
So now we're going to take a look at an old teaching pro. I'm hitting a nice SM8 60 degree that just showed up, and I'm demonstrating a 50-yard shot. And I just wanted to mention a few things that perhaps could help the weekend golfer in setup position and basically what you're trying to do, and reiterate that, kind of break it down, some basic fundamentals here. So a few things that address ball location is critical. Most of the time people don't have the ball placed far enough back for them to lean the shaft forward enough at impact. So I would, if you have a hard time leaning the shaft forward, I'd be sure to take advantage of that. I've got the ball placed pretty close to just slightly behind the center of my stance. If you haven't noticed, my weight is starting on my lead foot, and if you watch my head, it's never backing up. I'm always moving forward in the motion. You never want your weight to feel like it's backing up when you're hitting wedges. Only when you are hitting really long wedges, like over 100 yards, can you feel like you start to have a more traditional weight transfer. But on a lot of these smaller abbreviated motions that we're going to make from the fairway and talk about, your weight needs to start left and go further left throughout the rotational aspects. And then lastly, the arms and hands, like I said, from Jordan Spieth's images, you want to feel like you play a stronger club face angle. The club face doesn't swivel wide open on the backswing. And then on the way down, you want to really focus on your lead wrist, trying to feel bowed. And if you want, they call that the flexion, is feel like you're trying to take loft off the club for you. And that'll also help you square that lead edge and get the proper face angle as well. We're going to take a little different look here at what I think are great fundamentals as you prepare to hit distance wedges. So I've taken my trail arm and I'm pulling my lead arm to the chest. And if you notice, I go to that 730 position. I don't like to stop at impact. I like to go to that 730 position so I could get a sense of really how much turn I need to get through the club. After you support your lead arm and you can really feel that lead arm on the chest in this drill, then I think as a progression, you move into putting both hands on the club and trying to feel basically the same sequence. In my in my feel, I just feel like the club is later than normal. I don't tend to keep my connection enough. I tend to have my arms run out at impact too much, but I feel very rotated when I focus on that rotation. And when I make basic movement patterns like that while I'm hitting wedges between each shot, it really helps me get more rotation. So this is how the pros practice. They practice very thoughtfully and very deliberately with a lot of detail. And it's one of the things you can gain by just going to a tour event and watching how they practice. They move slow and they move very thoughtful. So this is a pretty good illustration of maybe something that could help you learn some basic fundamentals there on connection. Now we have a concept known as the launch gate. Doc, Neal, and I talk about in a lot of our videos. You're really just trying to drive the golf ball underneath that 30-degree launch window. It'd be really unusual if a tour player does not launch his fairway wedge shot under that window, because the ball's basically, it has a great risk of not spinning, and it's subjected to more influences. Like you just don't want a high spinning ball to get up in the air. And so a lot of the performance that we see from wedges, again, that technique plus equipment formula, a lot of the spin performance is found by trying to do drills like this, where you're really trying to lean the shaft forward and make sure that all your flight windows are under a certain level, and then you know you have the friction and the spin on the golf ball you want. By the way, it's really critical that you do this with a urethane covered ball like a Pro V1 or an AVX. If you try to do this drill with the typical range ball, you're going to have a hard time unless you're really good at leaning the shaft like 15 and 20 degrees further forward, because a range ball is going to want to slide right up the face and go over that every time. Even with good technique, it just doesn't interact with the materials on the club face the right way.
And then you might have noticed Layne's wrist actions, or some of the tour players' wrist actions. Here's a great drill for you to do to get the sense of how early you need to get your lead wrist into flexion. Notice Layne's just rehearsing that movement slowly, and I think that you understand that wrist flexion is when you move the palm of your hand towards the inside portion of your forearm. So it's too late if you try to do it at impact. You must do this early, and probably the earlier you do this, the better, and then feel like it stays bowed or flexed, just as Layne is demonstrating, all the way through impact. So I think a lot of people need to just rehearse this movement over and over again without hitting a golf ball, and then try to replicate that movement on a relatively short shot. Maybe it's only 30 or 40 yards, but really feel like you're launching this low, and you're doing it not by digging the club into the ground, but by bowing the lead wrist and rotating the body and then leaning the shaft forward. So, Layne, that's a great place to pause for a moment and see if there are any other questions or any questions that have come through. And then if there aren't, we'll move on to the next chapter of this presentation this morning. Or if there's anything that people aren't clear on, then let's get the questions now.
Doc, we don't have any questions yet, so I think maybe just keep moving along.
Okay, let's do it then. So we've gone through our distance wedges. Those are the longer wedge shots. Now we're going to finesse wedges, and so these are typically carrying maybe 30 to 40 yards at the most. Square face one certainly will go 40 yards, but we're probably going to focus more on the lower end of this fundamental shot, the ones that are carrying the 10 to 20, maybe 25 yards. Right. What are the control variables that are important for finesse wedge expertise? Different ones, or used in a different way. So the first one is attack angle. If you're going to become a very good finesse wedge player, you need to be able to shallow your angle of attack. We don't even need to put numbers on this for you. It just needs to be shallow so that you're only bruising the turf, not digging great holes or taking big divots. The second one is shaft lean, and this is a little different to distance wedges. So we were encouraging considerable forward shaft lean at impact for a distance wedge, but for a finesse wedge, we want to take some of the shaft lean back and allow the club to have a bit more loft. So we want a slightly higher launch angle, which will give us a slightly higher land angle. So that's what these control variables are. Again, shallow, -3 to -6 if you're into the numbers, but we need precise low point control, so we don't need this digging into the turf. And then the forward shaft lean, much less than with a distance wedge.
This is a great example from Justin Thomas here. This is taken short of 13 at Muirfield in the practice round. He's dropped a couple balls. Again, Mike is allowing us to access this video. Very, very appreciative of them helping us here. But we said we want a 20-yard pitch shot, square face from the fairway. It really doesn't get much better than this. And maybe at first glance it seems rather ordinary, but I find it incredibly impressive control from a couple different aspects. Number one, notice the head movement. It's real easy to see with the tower in the background and the flag using as a marker. Watch his head rise quickly. That's the extension Doc and I are often looking for. A lot of times it's happening before impact, and it's certainly aggressively happening after impact. But that's a beautiful illustration of really what you want to feel as you rotate. You definitely want to feel like you're growing, I like to say. And then secondly, he doesn't even really leave a mark on the grass. He's utilizing the bounce very nicely with incredible precision. I feel like he could almost go to the middle of the green and hit this shot. As we know, like Gary Woodland at the U.S. Open last year, these guys are pretty comfortable operating in this mode. It's common for tour players to pitch the ball, but it usually is among the best of them to pitch the ball in this manner where they just kind of shave it out of the ground. But this is a great demonstration of that by JT.
And then same shot from face on lane. The only thing I'd add here is that the modern day wedge really helps them in this type of shot, right?
That's right. That's right. There's so many advantages nowadays in the Vokey line compared to the classic wedges of the 70s from the manufacturers. They've really been able to capitalize on various designs and input from the players to kind of customize for different golf courses and different release patterns and preferences. So I total agreement with Doc. Looking at this motion, a couple things jump out to me. Incredible, very still, nice rotation and extension, but also I don't want it to be lost on how soft his arms look. That is a byproduct of the rotation. You're not going to have really soft, rhythmic appearances unless the motion is being primarily driven by the pivot and the rotation of the chest and pelvis.
And just for comparison, so we think that what Justin is doing there is remarkable and kind of like the gold standard. But Jordan Spieth's a pretty darn good finesse wedge player too, and this is extremely good technique also. So again, you'll notice the rotation, the extension. But one of the big differences, and I think that this is really evident with Jordan, is that he will take more divot than Justin. So there's much more kind of damage done to the turf when the club strikes the ground here with Jordan. But both techniques are effective. I think if I can summarize this, that Justin's technique affords him a little bit larger margin for error than the steeper attack angle that Jordan employs. So it's if you're as good as Jordan, you can use this technique, and it's perfectly effective.
So this is bunker line drill, and this is something that Duffner and I learned years ago from various people, but it was reinforced by Vijay Singh. We watched Vijay do a lot of this in his heyday in 2004 era, and we've seen some great old teachers like Ben Doyle help his students a lot with this. Wanted to take this opportunity right now to get into the bunker and do some great wedge play work, getting some feedback out of the sand. I've always thought that this is a great medium to work on technique and work on outcome. And so in this case, what we've done is we've smoothed the bunker out with the rounded side of the rake. That's really important. You don't want the big fluffy sand with big rake marks. And I've drawn a line in the sand. I've just used one of the basic fiberglass rods. You can easily just take the toe of the club and do it as well, but this is just a nice illustration. And what we're trying to do here is get the feedback of what the sand really provides in the ball contact. What you're trying to do and what you're trying to feel is how much turn of the body, how much rotation of the torso is needed to really move the club in perfect sequence of the arms and hands, and really the timing of the fold and the delivery. And so this highlights the attack angle tremendously, shaft lean, contact point, and all the control variables we constantly talk about. So let me get started. This is how you use the lead edge of this line. I'm going to put my lead edge on the forward side, and when I do this, I want to just kind of feel how much I have to turn. It forces to keep your center of mass real still, and you can see that's a perfect delivery. I entered the sand on the lead edge and I took my divot. I'm going to try to do it again. A little bit forward there, a little bit shallow there, but that was good. Low point. I missed the sand there. That was perfect. So you get that immediate feedback. That last one was about 1 inch fat. This is a really challenging drill. I love it because it really forces the body to turn, the connection of the arms, and a very stillness of your center of mass. It highlights the importance of the low energy shot and the precision needed for wedge play. So now I'm going to introduce the golf ball. Same concept. Put my lead edge down on the back of the ball, and I'm trying to pick this shot, trying to catch it clean, and ultimately it's not about the outcome, but it's about the feedback you're getting as you build your way towards good outcomes in the end. In the beginning of the drill, it's challenging. You're going to get a lot of feedback. Some of it has to do with the over acceleration of your arms and hands. Some of it has to do with the way your body's moving. But ultimately, when all that cleans up, you'll be able to hit really consistent, high quality golf shots, ball first. I'm going to try to do that now and talk your way through it here. Obviously, 4 inches fat. Let's try that again. Very solid. You can see the lead edge started right on the back of the line. I caught ball first. A little bit heavy. Again, that's a good illustration of strike margin, as we mentioned before. As long as you're shallow, you don't have to be perfect on your low point, and you still hit a decent golf shot. There'll be some things that change sometimes when you hit it fat, but you still hit pretty respectable outcomes. And then lastly, a little bit heavy again, but I get the ball out of the bunker, up on the green, decent results. I think that this is one of the most important drills, especially for advanced players to do to help clean up their technique
and again, build towards those good outcomes.
And so obviously solid contact point is critical here. I'll also say, it was said, I've heard stories by the greats through the game, this is how Seve practiced a lot also. We know he grew up on the beaches of Spain, and all he had is a 3-iron. I suspect that he was hitting these shots pretty solid most of the time, and he wasn't only hitting blasts. So the sand is a great medium to try to really teach yourself trust and good technique, and prepare yourself for those moments on the golf course when you don't have choice lies. So anytime you're facing into the grain, wet scenarios, this is something that you can recall and know that your training has prepared you for, because you can deliver with great precision that lead edge, and ultimately depend on the bounce like we saw from Justin Thomas. If you can really master this, you can really shave the ball and never get that sticky impact. And then the last piece that you could take away from this drill is you could hit to various pins on the green, and you could try to obviously pitch the ball close to the hole as kind of a master level piece. So you start off the line, the front edge of the line, then you secondly introduce a golf ball trying to hit it solid, and then you finish with trying to hit the ball close to the hole. So we like to teach in progression, and this is a great drill for that.
And Layne, it's important that the audience knows that you're not trying to hit a bunker shot here. That's right. Trying to hit a finesse wedge shot, so picking the ball cleanly out of the sand, right?
That's right. It's important to reiterate that we are trying to clip the ball as solid as possible, and this is the drill that's the shortcut. It'll make pitching off of grass like cheating if you can pitch it out of the bunker like this.
And I think, Layne, that concludes this section here on finesse wedges now. So we've only got our flop shot section to do, but have there been any questions, or do we just keep rolling on?
We've got a question. Let me throw at you, Doc, from Ted. With the shaft angles that you're suggesting, won't that discount the amount of bounce that is built into the specific wedge? Should I take into account more shaft lean when making decisions about how much bounce to purchase?
It's a difficult question to answer because it really depends on your ability to lean the shaft forward. Now, for distance wedges, the amount of bounce that you have on the club is somewhat negated by the forward shaft lean. And so I encourage actually to have people take more bounce than normal for their distance wedge clubs. So even for the 50 and 54 degree wedges, probably on the higher end of the bounce scale, because it's unlikely that you're going to open the leading edge up on those types of shots. So you're going to play those square faced, and you're probably going to have enough bounce there to be able to get the right turf interaction. When you come down to the shorter finesse wedge shots, and you've got less shaft lean, and you're probably going to play some shots with an open leading edge, that tends to elevate the leading edge when you rotate the face open. That's when the combination of different grinds and turf conditions has a big influence. And so some of the forward shaft lean, it negates the bounce, but then when you open the leading edge up, that adds it back in there again, or the effectiveness of the bounce. And I know that Bob Vokey talks about the effective bounce on the club versus the number that's put on there. And so that's probably the crucial fact in how the club plays out of the turf rather than what the number on the club actually is, right? So don't do the simple maths and say, oh, I'm leaning at 15 degrees forward, I need 20 degrees of bounce if I'm going to have some bounce there. No, it's the effectiveness of the bounce that's important.
Yeah, and I would add to that when you look at a wedge, you're really trying to use a surface that is very rounded. Okay, even if there's a what appears to be a flat surface, there's a lot of rounded angles depending on the lie angle you're using. And again, like Doc and Bob have mentioned, what portion of this bounce am I using? Am I using the portion off the trail edge of the heel, or am I using somewhere in the middle of the club forward? We're talking about an ever-changing surface because the technique and the angles that you're swinging the club are ever-changing too. So you're essentially trying to focus on some basics of, in my view, when we do wedge fittings, you get your workhorse out, like your 60 or 58. That's primarily what people use majority of the time inside 30 yards, right? So then you look at the release patterns, and do they have the ability to create shaft lean and attack angle? Can they manipulate attack angle based on the lie? And then what kind of surfaces are they playing from? Is it a really tight northeast bent grass like we see on great golf courses up there, or is it kind of a hairy, grainy Bermuda like in South Florida, or is it something besides that like a zoysia? And all of those are critical aspects to really turf interaction with the club and how to make a selection on bounce. But I think it's a case-by-case basis largely.
So, if there aren't any further questions, then we'll move to the final piece here, which is, I think, a kind of a specialty shot, but it brings into play the different control variables that you as a player need to become familiar with, and you're able to manipulate them. And so this is a very high launching shot with a high land angle, but typically not a lot of spin. Although this example here with the TrackMan numbers for a 10-yard shot are pretty remarkable. This is one that Jason Duffner hit for us a couple of months back, and it's just remarkable that he got that much spin from a golf ball that launched as high as that. Anyway, what are these control variables that we need to look at here? Shaft lean. So this time we're going to take shaft lean away. Club speed. Often we need a lot more club speed than we would for a similar length shot if it's a square face. And then face angle. We still need to have the face pointing towards our target, but we need to add loft. And so we need to figure out how to do that. So shaft lean at impact, 0 or close to 0. Club speed. I think Layne is going to give you a great example a little later on, and like in 2 or 3 slides, of club speed and how varied it needs to be. But 40, remember this number, 40 miles an hour for a 10-yard carry on a flop shot. So pretty darn high. And then, as I said here, the essence of hitting these flop shots in the correct direction is to make sure that the club face, the surface of the face, the orange stick, that is pointing in your desired direction towards the target. So, go ahead, Layne.
We've got Jordan here, number, I think, 5 at Muirfield, par 5. This is the kind of bailout. The lake is left, so this is a common area to pitch from, and that he's obviously going to an expected pin position on the front right of the green. So if you bail out right, you've got a short, high, soft, rough shot. The things that kind of jump out to us when we look at Jordan, what's a little bit different here is, number one, how wide his stance is. I think Jordan is of course, a classic example of of someone who has some these little orthodoxies. He has these little preferences. Everything about him is a little bit unique, and of course it's all special, but it's an unusually wide stance. I wouldn't necessarily say most of the people get that wide to hit this shot. He's just comfortable doing it. Secondly, we can see how open this club face is. It is the same bunker shot technique when he was going at the camera there earlier. The only difference is the ball is sitting in the rough rather than the sand, and he's got to try to predict how that lead edge is going to fit under the golf ball and get the loft, the intended loft of that open face on the ball. You notice again his alignment is very square. There's not a lot of opening of his body. The handle's low. It's similar to what we've seen again from Duffner and Adam Scott previously. And watch him go to the 730 position and stop. That's a real common piece for him. He'll do a little Texas twirl of the club and stick it in his pocket there. That's kind of the flair you get from Jordan. But he sticks that 730 position really nicely on a lot of these short shots.
And Layne, just before we move on to the next slide here, I would say his club head speed here is about 40 miles an hour. How far, if he was hitting a shot from the fairway with a square face, would this go? This one's traveling about 10 yards in the air, right?
Correct. Yeah. So what our testing shown is that if you're doing square face fairway technique, you're generally going to be in the 30 to 35 yard range with 40 miles an hour of club speed. And so it's important to understand that there's a lot of energy loss here. And so even though the club head's moving fast, we got to think about what's causing the ball to really move like half the speed of the club head on the way through, which is you got like you really got to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you could see why the double hit's in play. The ball's moving really slow after impact because there's so much energy loss. It's the face angles he's using, the amount that the club slows down moving through the grass. Those are the main reasons why you'd have a lot of energy loss. And then sometimes we have moisture too. When grass gets real moist, it can really slow the club down as well. But that's why the smash value is so low. That ball is moving very slow coming off the face.
Thank you. And then maybe point out some of the similarities, Layne, between what Jordan is doing and Jason's doing.
It's really extremely similar. If we had them face to face and you really broke it down in a split screen, you would just see maybe one primary or maybe two small differences. Number one, Duffner's stance is not as wide. He doesn't really get that wide unless he's really gets the handle down low and he's adding an extreme amount of loft, number one. Number two, if you watch the club face move in the arc, the overall motion, you can see that he's playing slightly different club face angles from Jordan. Jordan's got the club face a lot more open, so I think he's got a little bit of a competitive edge in this particular space because his face can get so open, and that's because of his lead hand grip. His left hand is so weak on the club. We saw the same kind of movement patterns from Luke Donald when we tested him. They have a real ability to get open face, kind of special shots at short distances, and a lot of that has to do with the overall grip type. Duffner has obviously a strong lead hand, and that's why it's one of the hallmark positions of his ball striking, but it doesn't really play into his hand when he's got to go short and high around the green. He's got to work extra hard.
And so we can see that the stance from face on here now, right, Layne?
That's right. A little narrower, but again, weight left. You could see him leaning left, and he goes further left, and then really very clearly into extension. Huge theme in this presentation. That cap is rising. Watch the logo on that hat. You can see in that, compared to the cloud in the background, he is extending here, and he's getting fully rotated on such a short shot. We see that on all the best wedge players that we've tested. whether it be Brett Rumford or other players that are excellent with wedges, that's a real critical piece to allowing them to turn and shallow the strike.
And then lastly, same sort of shot, almost on this. Is it the same hole, Layne?
Same hole. I think now he's actually hitting it a little bit lower here. He's kind of, Jordan, as you'd imagine, hits balls really fast. Just he kind of sees and does it. So it was hard for me to keep up with him in this case. But he's pitching the ball a little bit further now. And all he's doing really to control the launch and kind of the feel of the shot is he's going into that same mode we've seen earlier. He's just got a little more shaft lean at impact, but other than that, he's still got a lot of open face qualities, weight left. You could see him going to extension, weight stays left. He's just kind of punching the ball. It's almost like he punches the ball with his lead forearm. You know, that it's a well-documented chicken wing, as they call it. Him and Cameron talk about it in some videos that we've seen, and it's one of his greatest strengths. So he's creating the launch angle he wants sometimes, and the distance that he'd hit the ball a little bit with that shaft lean he's generating at impact there. That'd be the only difference between that and the previous shot, where his shaft was more vertical at impact and his left arm didn't come off of his body as much. So the ball took off a lot higher.
Fantastic. So a common theme, as Layne said, was that all of these players actually extend as they rotate in the downswing. So Layne, what we've got set up here is a great little training station to help people work on their finesse wedge body movement. So what has to happen in finesse wedges is as you come through impact, we want to see your spine extend upwards. So that means your head rises, it moves away from the target line, and of course it'll be moving towards the target. So we actually want to see some spine extension during the downswing, particularly late downswing. It just helps with angle of attack and shallowness concepts. So what we've done here is set up this shaft and pool noodle or alignment stick with the ball on the end, just for visual value. You're going to stand in and lean your head right against that thing, and we've got a ball on the tee here because the position of setup is really crucial here if we're going to make this work properly. And what we're going to be looking for is you start in contact with the ball, and then during the downswing you'll move away from this yellow tennis ball. So let's just try that, Layne. Good. So really nice contact. I'll put it back on the tee, and that way he doesn't have to change his address position and he can hit another shot, and you get the feedback immediately that you're moving away from it. Obviously a progression then would be to move away from a tee and just go straight on the ground. So if we put the ball where the tee was, and again, and if you're on grass, you'll get some good feedback here, because if your divots are really nice and shallow and you're keeping that club out of the turf, you'll be able to hit multiple shots from the same place each time. So that's a great drill for you guys to practice and get a sense of this up and rotation, as opposed to staying down and digging the club into the turf. And so, Layne, I'll stop sharing my screen, or Rick, I'll stop sharing my screen, and if there are any other questions, maybe you can voice them now.
We've got one from Jonathan Newman. I've answered it quickly while you were speaking to a couple points on Duffner earlier, but his question is, what wrist hinge trail arm fold do you take into account for the finesse wedges? I quickly responded, however you can control the variables, and there's no rules. The players must be able to create the proper environment for impact. but generally speaking, less wrist angles are easier to teach and execute. Would you like to comment on that, Doc?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, Layne, if you just maybe jump up and grab a wedge and kind of show your preferred technique for taking away the club and then what the elbow angles might look like. Yeah, that's good there. Excellent position. Yeah.
Let me go a little bit further this way. Okay, so generally speaking, what we saw on one of the Steve Stricker slides when we kind of shot in, the camera was kind of shooting in on him. You could see that he was in this ulna deviation there, thumbs down. It's hard to pitch finesse wedges and control them when you get a lot of wrist load. You get in that radial look where the thumbs are up and the hands are down low like that. So first off, I would get my wrist angles minimized. You're just trying to reduce the amount of complexities, okay? From that position, all you're trying to do is drive the motion, the movement from your body here with your chest, okay? You can see this is kind of like Stricker would look. He would not have much change to his wrist position, and then the trail arm would just go into a slight fold there. There would not be a heavy set short right arm at all. It would just be, the movement would be primarily governed by a rotation like that, and then you just change direction and pivot on the way through, and you kind of hit that 730 position this way, and you hold it. What you're looking for is, did I disturb my lead wrist, or did I keep the loft on the club? You don't want to feel like the club head beats the handle around the corner. You want to feel like the handle leads around the corner, and you get in that position. We saw Poulter and Spieth and Duffner and Scott and all these guys, Stricker, they're always going to that position there. We actually see it a lot out of Tiger Woods. He hits a ton of golf shots where he cuts it off. And the way you're able to do that is simply by turning your chest and reducing the responsibility of the arms and hands. That may take a lot of work for some people to develop, but it's the easiest way to control a lot of the things we've talked about at impact. You're taking variables out, and you're creating a big flat spot at the bottom with the loft that you intend to deliver.
Oh, that's excellent, Layne. That's a really good example there.
Thanks. So I think we've just had those few. Anything else from Rick or Alan?
Yeah, actually, I had a question just kind of listening in as a golfer. So something I'm concerned about watching all these tour pros hitting these shots. Sometimes I just feel like, hey, these are tour pros, so they can execute these things. But then based on some other things I've heard, it sounds like a lot of kind of weekend golfers use wedges incorrectly. And I'm just kind of wondering, do pros work smarter, not harder? And do you see AMs kind of working harder at it? Like, are these practices something that amateurs can easily adopt, or am I right, and pros do have an advantage just because they're so good?
I'll take a stab at that first, Alan. I think that we're talking about in terms of wedges, and as we get closer to the hole, we've got to realize that this whole space, we're talking about precision. Number one, you can't just muscle the ball out there and be effective. That is not performance with a wedge. It is having the deft touch and the presentation of how you get the club on the ball with all these varied lies and these crazy land surfaces and things we have to deal with. So it's a precision space. And so how do you become a great jeweler, basically, is how I look at it. You know, how do you create great motor skills? You're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to do a lot of practice and develop these skills to pitch the ball like we see the guys who are winning majors and the guys who, you know, make the most amount of money in golf. They're highly gifted. When guys get to top 25 in the world, they're not like a monkey with a wedge. They might hit the ball really far, but they have tremendous skill sets. Even the guys that are really powerful, they have amazing finesse and touch around the greens. Some things they might be better at than others. They might have holes in their game they want to avoid, but they all really have this huge skill set of precision with the wedge, because that's the only way they're going to be able to get the scores correct and, in other words, put themselves in the position to contend in the majors like they do.
And can I add to that, Alan? I think the skills required in this finesse space and even the distance wedge space can be taught. Then, as Layne said, it's not necessarily a high speed requirement, but there is a precision requirement. But no matter how much practice you do, if you don't have the right technique, just like if you don't have the right ball and the right club, you're not going to get the performance that you're looking for. So I say it's imperative to get the right information, to know what you've got to do with that implement when it strikes the ball. And so I think that the foundations that Layne and I provided in the WedgeCraft space really help amateurs to know what they need to do, and then they can go and develop the skills. They might not ever get as good as a tour player, because these guys really are special, but you can really enhance your skill by working on the things that Layne has already said. Body rotations, connection, wrist angles, those sorts of things.
So I think that kind of brings us to the conclusion of things, Doc.
Yes. And Layne, you can speak to this if you like.
Yeah, so over the last few years, as Doc and I mentioned, we've done maybe close to 8 years of pretty high level tour research, where we've had some of the best wedge players in the world, and we've had them hit with the most technology that we could combine together with 3D and radars. We've tracked very specifically what the ball, club, and body are doing, and we've put that together and made the framework, what we call the control variables. We are going to unveil that in this video presentation here that you're watching on our website, and then we're going to reinforce a lot of the ways that you can learn these concepts through training mechanisms. We have about 3.5 hours of video and about 40 different drills that complement the wedge work inside of 100 yards. And so it's important for us to tell you that we worked hard on it, we're proud of it, and we're so grateful for Team Titleist and Acushnet and everyone giving us the opportunity to share with you some of this information today. You can find out a lot more about this at wedgecraft.com.
Well, guys, I want to thank you very much. That's the end of our time, but I wanted to mention one thing to the audience, and that's that we will have a clean recording of this. I apologize, we're somewhat at the mercy of internet providers, and so we do have the presentation in clean format that we will supply on Team Titleist so that you can have a nice clean version of this presentation. But we thank you very much for being here, Rob, Layne, and Alan. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say to the group?
No, just thank you all around. Thanks to Rob and Neal, because you bring a whole dedicated perspective to wedge play that I always find really refreshing. And then just, again, thanks to Team Titleist for spending time with us. And it's cool that we can bring these experiences to a digital capacity. And Rick, thank you for all your hard work helping bring this to life as well.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks, guys.
See you.
Take care.